everyone. This is Fadi, and I want to welcome you to, we can say, the finale of this fascinating short series and also a brief series on the Sonship of Christ. The intent really was just to highlight the importance and the meaning of this particular title, and then take a journey through the New Testament, not necessarily every single book, but we selected the Gospels, the Synoptic Gospel, the Gospel of John, some of the writings of Paul, and today we are going to look at the book of Hebrews and how Hebrews also highlighted the title or the term Son of God, or the Sonship, in this case, of Christ himself. With us here virtually in our studios, our dear brother Anthony Rogers. Anthony, thank you, brother, again, as always, for making time for us, and thank you for the wonderful teachings that you have poured out on us in the last few episodes, and we're looking forward to today's episode as well. So take it away.
Yeah, thanks again for having me, Al. It's always a pleasure. So in the book of Hebrews, and you and I both love this book. I know we've talked about it before. I feel like that's true when it comes to every episode here. There's something that we've discussed in one way or another already. But in Hebrews 1, we really don't have to get out of the first chapter, although we could, when it comes to looking at Christ's sonship, the fact that he's the Son, what it means to call him the Son, the importance of calling him the Son. But I'll first just read the first several verses, which are just so power-packed in themselves. There's enough there to spend an entire hour or two on. But it says, God, after he spoke long ago to the fathers in the prophets in many portions and in many ways, in these last days has spoken to us in his Son. And here it's important, in order to understand already how he's using the term Son, to note the finality and the climactic nature of this, given what the author of Hebrews has said. He's telling us that God has revealed himself in the past through many prophets, but partially, right? Many times, many ways. The very language is a way of saying that this revelation of God was true, but incomplete. But then he says, but, he uses the strong adversative here, but in these last days, he has spoken. Now using a particular grammatical form to indicate the finality of this. Mm-hmm. He has spoken in his Son. So this revelation in the Son is climactic. So clearly he's not Son in any ordinary sense, according to the author of Hebrews. He is the final, the full, the climactic, the complete revelation of God to men. Then he goes on to say, whom he appointed heir of all things. So this one who is the Son is the heir of everything. This is language that Muslims should be familiar with, because Allah says that he's the one who's going to inherit everything. It's not a way of saying this one is not the creator of everything. It's just a way of saying it all ultimately belongs to him, right? Well, that's true in the New Testament as well. In fact, notice what it goes on to say. He appointed him heir of all things, through whom also he made the world. Mm-hmm. So this Son, who is the final, full, and complete revelation of God, the one who's going to inherit everything, is also the one through whom everything was made.
That's right.
So he's not any ordinary Son, is he? He's a Son in the sense that we've already clearly defined in previous episodes. He's the Son in a divine sense. One more from this particular part before looking later in the prologue, but he says, he is the radiance of his glory in verse 3 and the exact representation of his nature, and upholds all things by the word of his power. So this Son who was with the Father and made all things and is the climactic revelation of God is also the one who upholds all things. Now, why was he able with the Father to create and with the Father able to uphold all things? Precisely because he is the radiance, the effulgence, the outshining of God's glory, the exact representation of his nature, as the author of Hebrews says. How much clearer can you get that being the Son does not mean that Christ is something less than absolute deity?
That's right. That's right. It's amazing indeed. I mean, like you said, just the first two verses of this particular letter are amazing, and it's many believe it's a sermon. Actually, I mean, at least when you study the book and its composition, and the author, of course, laid out the supremacy of Christ and his superiority over many things in the Old Testament, including Moses, the high priest, and Melchizedek, and the list can go on and on and on.
Yeah, and in fact, that actually gets us into some of the rest of what the author says here, because you say it's about the superiority of Christ, and you mentioned certain Old Testament figures. Notice here that it goes on to speak of his superiority to the angels. So even the angels who are greater at present in terms of their power, right? They have a particular position hierarchically. Man is ultimately going to be exalted above them because man was made in God's image. But this is all after God's purposes are worked out in history and people are redeemed and united to Christ and exalted. But at present, angels are superior to men, and yet Jesus is said to be superior to the angels, right? He goes on to say that Jesus is better than the angels and has inherited a name more excellent than they. And then he says, "For to which of the angels did he," meaning God, "ever say, 'You are my son, this day I have begotten you'?" Now, here I want to stop for a moment. And again, I wish we had more time, but I'm going to have to be brief and kind of direct people to some things for further study on this. Here in verse 5, he begins his litany of Old Testament quotations with a quotation from Psalm 2. If you go to the end of Hebrews 1 and you look at his final quotation, it's a quotation from Psalm 110. In the Hebrew text of Psalm 110, it refers to the one who's seated at God's right hand. It refers to him in verse 3 as the one who was begotten before the day star, before creation. Right? That's how it's rendered by Jews in the Greek Septuagint. And so this shows us that the begetting of the Son mentioned in Psalm 2 is not a reference to something that takes place in time, but is a reference to his eternal begetting by the Father. Right? The Father eternally begat him in eternity, the days of eternity, if you will. And so that's why the author of Hebrews is able to quote this passage and say it proves the superiority of Jesus, because it's not a begetting that took place in the today of temporal succession that exists in the world, but in the today of eternity, meaning before time even began. But people will have to watch. I have some episodes on Mark's Gospel where they can see this. I think you and I may have done so. I know we've talked about this. I just can't recall the context in which we did it. So maybe it was in our discussion of Mark's Gospel or something. I don't know. But then he goes on and he quotes verse 6. He quotes another Old Testament text where all the angels of God are commanded to worship Jesus as the firstborn, which doesn't mean literally the person born first in the order of time. Firstborn was a title of preeminence, meaning the one who is superior to others. And so Jesus is identified as the one who is preeminent over others and the one whom the angels are obligated to worship. And then the climax is really found in Hebrews 1, verse 8 and Hebrews 1, verse 10. In Hebrews 1:8, it says, "Of the Son, he says," he meaning God, "of the Son, he, God, says, 'Your throne, O God, is forever and ever, and the righteous scepter is the scepter of your kingdom.'" And then in verse 10, it says that the Father says about the Son, "You, Lord, in the beginning laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They'll wear out like a garment," and so forth. But you're going to remain the same, and your years will never end. So the author of Hebrews, just in the first chapter, has driven this point over and over again. We're being brief, but packed into each one of these statements is a powerful attestation of Christ's sonship and what it means and how it is properly and necessarily understood as a claim of absolute deity.
Absolutely, brother. Absolutely. No doubt about that. And I'm encouraging people, of course, to go and read that for themselves. Anything else from Hebrews you would like to also highlight?
Well, I mean, one thing that we could point out is, well, in chapter 2, it goes on to speak of the fact that Jesus is the one who is going to ultimately realize God's purposes for creation, right? Mankind was created by God but fell and needed to be redeemed and restored in order to achieve that ultimate goal that God had for man. And so it became necessary for the Son to bring about redemption. In Hebrews 2, it specifically tells us that he took on himself the nature of Abraham's descendants, meaning he became human, right? And it also says he didn't take on himself the nature of angels. It's not angels that he helps, but Abraham's seed.
That's right.
This very language presupposes the preexistence of the Son and points up the incarnation. It speaks of him taking on the nature of Abraham's descendants, right? There's no, if he really just is a human being and not a pre-existing divine person who takes on a human nature, there's no reason to speak this way. So the very language of Hebrews throughout presupposes this understanding of Christ's sonship. Another thing that can be pointed out is in Hebrews 7, we're told that Melchizedek is a type of Jesus.
Right.
And the reason he can be a type of Jesus is because there's nothing stated in the Old Testament about Melchizedek's genealogy, which you'd expect, especially since he's being identified as a priest. A priest in the order of Aaron had to show his lineal descent from Aaron, or else he couldn't be a priest.
Correct.
So for Melchizedek to be mentioned in the Old Testament without any genealogy being given, he's said to be a priest, evokes, these sorts of connections that the author of Hebrews makes. He tells us that Melchizedek is a type of Jesus, meaning he's a picture of Jesus. The Spirit left out certain details in Genesis precisely so that he might use Melchizedek to point people to Jesus. And so he says that Melchizedek, we don't learn anything about when he was born, and that's in order to show that he's without beginning of days. We learn nothing about his death in order to show that he has no end of life. And so in this sense, he represents the Son of God, who is a priest forever, the author of Hebrews says. So there again, you have an understanding of Christ's sonship being given in Hebrews 7. To be the Son means to be without beginning of days or end of life.
Right.
Also, one final thing is in Hebrews 11, one of my favorite texts, it doesn't specifically refer there to Christ as the Son, but it's talking about Jesus. And it's talking about these great men of faith in the past and how they believed and by faith did great things in the name of God. And it comes to Moses, and it tells us that Moses, by faith, he didn't do what he could have done as the prince of Egypt. He could have made use of that to his own advantage. He could have looked down upon his Israelite brothers. He could have despised them and so forth. But it says that he chose to suffer affliction along with them. And then it says this, it says he decided to be reproached with Christ or suffer the reproach of Christ rather than all the treasures of Egypt. Now, how does Moses choose to endure affliction along with the people of God and reproach with Christ or the reproach of Christ unless Christ is there with them?
That's right. And you remember the Mount of Transfiguration when Moses was one of those two figures.
Yeah, Moses appeared on the mountain. It had to be like deja vu for Moses, right? When Moses appeared on the Mount of Transfiguration, he's thinking, I've done this before. I've seen you on Mount Sinai before, on a mountain, in the past.
Absolutely, brother. This is fascinating, and thank you again, brother, for doing such a great job in such a short, basically, time frame for each episode. It's intentional, obviously. We wanted to do a short overview for now. Lord willing, we will begin to unpack these. Possibly we'll take each one of them and just do an entire series, like from each one of those segments about the Synoptic Gospels, about John, about the writings of Paul, the Hebrews, and maybe even others that we left off this time. So again, we appreciate you, appreciate your time. Thank you for everyone, those who are watching. Thank you for your comments. And we encourage you, of course, to subscribe to Anthony's YouTube channel, which is called Anthony Rogers, right? Yep. So it's very simple.
Very clever, unique, witty name.
No one can mimic that name, so you cannot miss it. So you can subscribe to it, and we encourage you to support the brother also. He lives by faith. He does a lot of wonderful work. He teaches, he does live streams, he preaches, among many other things. He even, I think you are with a volunteer or working with the Ligonier Ministries, if I recall.
Yeah, I work for them in a remote capacity as a
Right.
theological agent. I answer theological questions for them.
Wonderful. And it's, I hate to say it, brother, but not everybody possibly will qualify for something like that. So I'm just highlighting to people the how confident these ministries are with your knowledge. And we praise the Lord for that. And we're so blessed by it. So everyone, I encourage you to please bless our brother in a variety of ways, partnered with him as well as you are doing with us. And we thank you for that. Until we meet again next time, hopefully in a brand new series or even unpacking this one. Brother, thank you so much. Everyone, thank you. This is Al-Fadi, over and out. God bless. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, CIRA International, and click on the bell so that you receive notifications whenever we publish a new video or go live. I would also like to appeal to you to consider becoming a Patreon patron by clicking the link right below. By doing so, you can give towards the production of these videos. There are also other options for you where you can give to our channel. I thank you from the bottom of my heart.